Hello, everyone. I'm Martina Saldi. I'm the go-to-market manager for data security in the cybersecurity business group for Australia and New Zealand Microsoft. So I'm very happy to be here today.
Hi, I'm Paul Maggs. I'm a consultant at Rinco and a security tech stream lead.
Nice to meet you. So missing data classification is the first topic we're going to talk about, right? And we saw that since November 2022, we have observed like a doubling of potential data exfiltration instances after threat actors compromised an environment. So Australia and New Zealand experienced major data breaches in the past few years, which exposed the data of millions of citizens. The increased amount of data we produce and the sophistication of attacks and increased regulation as well, like have created like an urgency for all organizations across the globe around having a data security strategy in place and protecting their data. And interesting, like in the research, we see that 83% of organizations have experienced at least one data breach in their lifetime, of which 20% around was due to an internal actors, and with an average cost of 15 millions when the internal actor was malicious. So the costs are significant and cannot be longer ignored. And interestingly, we see that data theft and data leakages are one of the most common vulnerabilities today that and risk that organizations need to address. So many data thefts are associated with ransomware and extortion activities, but it can also be part of a national state espionage or a data leakage, as we were saying. So it's clear that to me that stopping data exfiltration and leakages requires a broader approach than just focusing solely on preventing ransomware. So with data protection being top of mind for organization of each size and each industry, especially in this area of AI, Paul, can you take us through the key challenges and consideration and actions that customer can make in this scenario?
Yeah, sure. So I'll start with those challenges and, what are we seeing from organizations and what's kind of impacting their ability to kind of, do data classification. I think the number one is that it's too hard to solve. There's too much data. It's stored in so many locations. And so it comes down to, where do I start? How do I actually start that process to actually do that classification? The other thing as well is, because the data is spread out across so many different locations and there's so much of it, how do I find out which is sensitive data? There's going to be so much data that is not sensitive, but which one is sensitive? What type of sensitivity is it? Is it financial? Is it medical? Is it some, internal IP that you've developed as well that you don't want getting out into other people's hands? And then you've got to start thinking, so yeah, well, it's a big problem. How do I actually classify it? But then how do I start protecting it? What can I do to protect it so that, if people do get or attempt to get access to it, they're blocked from being able to actually access that data, or we can stop any inadvertent sharing, for example, with people that shouldn't be seeing that information. The other area as well that needs to be concentrated on, which is a challenge, is user adoption, because doing data classification, whilst we've got technology to help, I look at it as a people, process, and technology problem.
Yes.
And the real hard areas to get right are the people in the process, because they have to understand how they're going to be classifying data, what is sensitive data that needs to be classified. So what are those processes that you've got to have in place? But when we extend beyond that, we've got the technology. The technology should be assisting all of these people so they actually know how they should be classifying their data. So we've got things that we can enable to make their life a little bit easier. We can also do things around automation as well.
That's important.
Very important, because without good user adoption, you could put all these technologies in place and it's going to fail. You're not going to classify your data because no one's using it, no one knows how to use it. And finally, the big shift, AI. We've got Copilot. We've got all these technologies that can go out there and enable us to simplify our lives, but because it needs to access that data, we want to make sure it's only accessing the right data, so it's not servicing sensitive information that they should not be seeing. So when I look at this, what are some of those key actions? What are some of the things that we can do to get it so that we can actually, solve this problem around data classification and the sharing of data and those sorts of things? So the first thing is, it's not a simple one-step process to get your data classified and it's all done. This is a journey. You're going to mature it over time. So think about it is you're going to have to bite it off in bite-sized chunks that is going to work for your particular organization, and then start scaling out from there. So you might start with a smaller particular group of people, or you might be targeting a specific data that is sensitive. So think about how you can actually start small and then build out from there. Do you have data handling policies? How should people be handling data? Because if you haven't got that defined, how do you know how you should be protecting it if you've got particular types of data? If it's confidential data, should they be emailing it to people? Should they be using sharing? How should you lock down so only the right people have it? So you really need to understand how data should be classified and how it should be handled as well. And so once we have those in place, we know it's a journey, we've got our handling policies, we then want to start doing a discovery. We want to know what our data is. Number one, we can't do any protections unless we know what that data is. So, Microsoft Purview, for example, it can go out there, it's got over 200 built-in rule set capabilities to detect different types of data. It could be medical, it could be financial, it could be driver's licenses. So it can go and tell you, where that data sits within your cloud, on premises as well, and there are to some extent going out to third-party clouds as well, but you can actually see where that style of type of data is, who has access to it as well, where it is sitting. So is it sitting in someone's OneDrive? Should it be sitting there? So you'll get this overall picture of where your data is. And once you actually know where it is, you can start looking and saying, is this data in the right locations? Are people using it correctly? And to assist that, we can start protecting our data. So for example, we might have it so if I'm working on a document, I might actually label that document in a particular way where it will, it'll put some markings on it. It'll tell me it's a confidential because I've labeled it as confidential. Having that visual representation can help people to understand, oh, this is this style of document. Maybe I shouldn't be sharing it with everyone. I've got to keep it where it is and locked down. So that's quite important as well. We can add encryption, so only certain people. So once you know your data, you want to start protecting your data. And there are some great capabilities that Purview will give you in terms of we can add markings to a document, for example, or an email where it will state that it's confidential. So it gives visual feedback so people understand the sensitivity of it. The other thing that we can do is apply encryption so that we can limit the scope of the people who can access that document. And the beauty of that is that encryption is with that document no matter where it is. So whilst you might have it stored in a secure location that people can't access, you might then email it to someone or share it with someone who has access to the document. You've enabled the encryption to allow them to read it, but anyone else who took that document, they don't have access at all. So that's a good way of locking it down. With that as well, when we are looking at adding, sensitive information into a document or an email or something along those lines, building in some of those automations so that we'll get a visual that says, hey, you've put in some sensitive information into this email. You should be labeling it as confidential, for example. And then you can take that feedback and then you can label it. We can automatically apply those sorts of labels as well. And that might be adding in additional protections such as your encryption. So we get the visual feedback, get people on board, but where we're very confident, just automatically apply it so that people don't have to do it, they don't have to think about it. So once you've applied those protections to your documents as well, or emails, you can also then integrate it with your data loss prevention. So with Purview, we can look at things such as if it's got a particular label applied to it, should people be able to email that externally? Should they be able to email it internally? Can they share it as well? So we can have a look at the label that is applied. That's quite useful. Or we can also then look for particular bits of data that we're trying to share and collaborate with others, and then we can have Purview take action on that, whether it's auditing, whether it's going to do a block action, or it might do something where it's just going to encrypt that data as well. So there's quite a few different things that you can actually do to prevent, that data loss, and make sure that when people are collaborating and working, it's still in a secure fashion. We've talked a little bit about Purview and some of the things it can do, but if you step back to the basics, what are some of those basic kind of configuration settings that you can enable? It could be in your Office 365 tenant, for example. When someone goes to share a document, it can give you some defaults. Am I able to share it externally, internally, or only with specific people that I have added in? So you could restrict who it can be shared with if you need to, or you could set which one is the default, because you don't want that default to be, people external of the organization. Make them select that so they're actually thinking about what they're doing when they're sharing. So you've got some of the basics there that you can configure. Also, we can look at, whilst we think about, I've got a document and I label it as confidential, for example, we can look at container level labeling as well. And this can be quite nice for, if I'm working in teams, for example, I could label that team at the container level, and I might label it as confidential, and I've then put some configurations and controls in place so that if it is confidential, you can't share any information from that team's location. So people can still share from other team sites that aren't considered confidential, but this confidential site, you've locked that down. Or it might be that you don't want guests to be able to get in there as well and see the content.
Absolutely.
So you can actually start putting in those restrictions based on the type of content or the type of location that it's being stored with, but not restrict in other areas where you don't need to. Also looking at, I have mentioned data classification is a journey. There's a lot of stuff that you need to do to kind of look at your entire data estate and then start, applying that classifications, which then can apply protections and help with DLP. Looking at what are some of the automation capabilities that you could do. So the way I like to look at it is if you're building it and people have got to label a document, for example, start then building out the capabilities so that it will give them suggestions. Start refining that so those suggestions are quite accurate. Once you know they're accurate, then you can start applying some automation so it knows when it senses particular pieces of data, it's going to apply a label of your choosing. And you can get that done at scale across your cloud environment. And you can look at your on-premises environment as well, because there's still going to be a lot of organizations still have a lot of data on those environments as well, because they haven't been able to migrate it at this point in time. We can do that with the Purview, or Defender for Cloud Apps is another really good resource for providing those, enabling those automations in terms of how you apply those protections. I did mention earlier as well, user adoption can be one of those big, blockages that can stop getting, all of your data classified. So make sure that you're engaged with, those who really understand, adoption and change management. What are some of the kind of things that you need to put into place so people understand how they should be classifying data, why they're classifying data, what are the impacts on them, and start reinforcing those messages and start ramping it up over time so that you've got champions out there so they can help them out whenever they need that sort of help. The other really nice thing that you could use in the Purview portal as well is looking at the compliance templates that have been provided. And so, meeting a standard or a regulation, there can be a lot of tick boxes and things that you've got to do to get there. And so it can be hard at times to think, how do I actually get there? Well, there's templates that you can actually use. There's a data protection baseline that you can have. There's, there's templates that align to the, Essential 8, the Australian Privacy Act, and it'll actually give you a whole list of items of what you need to do to get to that standard, and it's going to include things around, your DLP, your classifications, your protections, and where you should be doing it as well. And it can also give you, indications of how you can actually apply those as well. So those templates are really good, and then you've got something that you can measure as well.
Yes.
It's always nice to be able to measure it. And also, whilst we're talking about, we're going to discover stuff, discover data, we're going to apply labels and so forth, you really have to step it back. So mentioned earlier, AI. If I've got access to something, Copilot's going to have access to it as well, and that's fantastic because it's got a broad range of data it can access. But what if there is someone who hasn't locked down some of this data correctly? What if it's in a location you've never thought of, so you don't actively seek it out, but now it's going to become available? So you want to go through and look at how do we actually handle our sensitive data in terms of how do we provision the locations that this data is going to be stored? How do we actually assign those permissions? What is the lifecycle management of those permissions? How do we govern those? So, we can be looking at things such as, access reviews for sensitive sites and locations to make sure that the right people have access in there as well. But, that's something that's going to take a little bit of time just to go through all of those locations and make sure you're doing it right, and then build a consistent standard on how you actually deploy a Teams site or a SharePoint site or anywhere that's going to store data, so that you know that only the right people have access to it. And of course, this is always my final one, always monitoring and auditing. Always have those capabilities. And with Purview, you've got a lot of that enabled as well. It can flow into activities on the endpoint with Defender for Endpoint. We can see the labeling activities that people are doing. Is someone removing labels that they shouldn't? And then that can also tie into things such as insider risk management. So we can start seeing if people are, declassifying documents, so then they can exfiltrate them. So, monitoring, auditing of what's happening in the environment, extremely important.
Absolutely. I like the points you're making about auditing, monitoring. Like, it's so important, especially when it comes to compliance and making sure that we comply with some regulations. Like you mentioned, essentially the Privacy Act. More recently, we have been working and doing a lot of work on critical infrastructure bill as well. At least to cover part of it and mapping our technology to it. But yeah, definitely good point. Automation. I'm sure that all the industry will be happy to have this automation piece in place and simplify the whole process, which has been there for a while. But obviously, these are a great improvement that we're seeing in the market. So, well, thanks, Paul.
I will add one thing here.
Yes.
Just I think with data classification and because of that proliferation of data, always remember it is a journey, and always build it up over time. Get it right in stages, and as it gets better and better, you're going to start seeing more of your data getting classified, which means you can get more protections and stop that data leakage.
Absolutely, it's starting, right? And I guess it's with AI, we see this becoming more and more urgent for everyone. As I was saying before, right? It's been there for a while, but obviously this has become more urgent. But it's just starting the journey, and then obviously it gets easier as we go. So luckily we have partners like yourself, helping us make this happen across all industries. So, but well, thanks. About let's say that alongside with data protection, there's one specific point that I'm interested to hear about the report that. I was reading that the 21% of customers have missing cloud application management and monitoring. So in the context of multi-cloud and use and sharing of data and compliance, so we obviously understand that the market's changing and governments are moving towards a more let's say mandatory requirements where before they weren't mandatory, right? So non-compliance can result on some financial penalties or the loss of access to market segments. So especially when it comes the misuse of personal or sensitive information. So I'm eager to hear your thoughts on what customers should be thinking about when it comes to cloud governance and compliance, and what actions they can take.
Yeah, sure. So thinking about some of the challenges in this space, with the proliferation of cloud services, how do you maintain visibility of what people are using? There are so many cloud apps out there today. The other thing as well, anyone with a credit card can sign up to these cloud services as well. So, someone might like a specific service for storage of files, they go out and buy it. Or there's a need that they have and that meets their needs. So, visibility is key in this space. When we look at that visibility as well, we're looking at what is shadow IT. What are some of those areas where, is this an application that we're happy that people are to use? Is it something that could be introducing risk as well? Is this a service that may not have all the right, security and compliance, requirements that we need for our data? Is that putting us at risk as well? The other thing as well, how do I control the flow of data between all of these cloud services? Because the way that we're working now, I pick up a laptop or a mobile device, I can work anywhere, anytime, internet connection. How do you actually control what's going on with your data? It's becoming, we're not just within those boundaries of those networks like we used to have, that we could really control that flow. Also, if we are using cloud applications, we might be integrating those into our, Microsoft 365 environment. What are those applications? Do they have high privileges? What data can they access as well? And, how do we kind of look at what's happening in the environment? So thinking about this, some of those key actions to kind of undertake to understand what's occurring within the environment, and is kind of, you need to really discover and assess, all of those cloud applications. And you're probably thinking, discover and assess all of these applications. How do you do it? Because, people might be using a mobile device or a laptop or something. So, and then we want to be able to review, discover those and then review, do they meet all of our minimum requirements for, storage of our data? And so, we might look at something such as, using Defender for Cloud Apps, where we can ingest proxy logs, for example. We can understand what's happening with network traffic, or extending it into Defender for Endpoint, where we can get telemetry from those endpoints about those cloud services that people are using and how much data is flowing in between them. That can all come up into the Defender for Cloud Apps portal as well, so we can start getting an overview of all those applications. Also, once we do know what applications are in use, we can do something called sanctioning. So, and if we're integrated with something like, Defender for Endpoint, or we've got a cloud proxy session where all of our traffic routes via a proxy that we're controlling, we can then say, okay, this application, we sanction it, we give it the tick, you can use it. We could unsanction it, so if they go to it, it's going to be blocked. So it might be that third-party file storage location that you don't want your data stored in, and you can block people from using that. And that's going to limit your exposure as well, about oversharing data into the wrong places. Or if it is a platform that you don't want people using, what happens if they get compromised and then people can gain access into that data? So you really need to think about those, and that's why you want to start controlling what cloud applications people potentially will be using for their data storage. Also, when we are using cloud apps, we can, with Defender for Cloud Apps, we can create session policies where we can actually proxy our sessions so that we can monitor those. We can also integrate these with third-party cloud applications as well, and it integrates with Entra ID, so we're using the one ID. And that is really nice, because then we can apply our controls such as conditional access, MFA, and so that we've got control over those. But if we do have data that is stored in the cloud and we want people to be able to access it, we can create rules such as, okay, if you're on an unmanaged device, we really don't want you just being able to download the file and you've got that file that could then be targeted by someone and they can take off with it and, share it with others. We might have something such as, if you download it, sure, you can download it, but we're going to make it so it's encrypted. So it's only going to allow you to access that file. So it is protected. So you're coming in from an unmanaged device, but you can still protect that data. If I'm going to upload it to a cloud service that I do approve, fine, you can do that, but can you please classify and label this document so then we can track that across multi-cloud platforms as well, and we understand where that data is sitting.
So important.
Very important. Yeah, that's right. So, so that kind of gives you some of those DLP and some of those compliance capabilities that you'd be looking for. Or if we want to take it to another extreme, we can block you from, you can look at a document in a web format, but we're going to block you from downloading it so you can still access it and read it and work on it. Or we might stop you from printing it as well. So there's a bunch of controls that you can apply in real time
Yes.
based on certain sets of rules and the people who are accessing it. And it could be, based on the devices they're using as well. So you get a lot of control in that space.
I think it's important as well on the platform and collaboration tools that are outside an organization, right? Like how many people like use WhatsApp or like to share sensitive information. That has always been a challenge, right? So I think that going and protect on a data level, it's very important in so many industries that have like workers, frontline workers, for example, right? So, but please do continue.
No, that's exactly right. When you've got those protections there,
Yes.
if it's encrypted, you've got to be authenticated.
Yes.
And it says, yes, you do have permissions to read this, and then it will decrypt it. So no matter where that data sits, that is, that's probably one of the best ways that you can protect your data.
Yes.
The other things as well is, with Defender for Cloud apps and, looking at our multi-cloud environments, or what are some of the threats that are coming from those environments? Are people trying to sign into it? Are they trying to do password sprays? Are they trying to do impossible travel? Some of those real kind of typical and simple things that we can detect. It can go and extends out beyond those quite a lot. But how do we actually detect any kind of malicious activities or people with the intent to do something malicious, and how can we get alerted to that so that we understand what's occurring in the environment? It might be an account that's being compromised, and you can monitor it, and it might be trying to access a cloud service. But getting that kind of auditing and monitoring in place is going to be quite important, so you can understand what's happening within that environment itself, and that's leading on to having a good audit trail. The other thing, if I want to kind of lead into the audit trail as well, a really nice capability with Defender for Cloud apps in terms of looking at the file activity within the environment is, traditionally, if we've got a lot of data, a lot of files, who has permissions to it, it's pretty hard to kind of get an overall picture of that. Someone shared it externally, who did they share it with, and who has access to it? So the good thing here is with that, managing what's stored in your cloud environment is being able to pull up reports on what files are shared externally, and you might then filter that by, is it confidential data? Is it sensitive data of a particular type? Or you might be also looking, has it been shared anonymously? So anyone with a link can share it. Is it just defined down to specific people? But then we can actually look at those files and perform actions. We can start looking at the sharing, and we can remove people from that access list quite easily across all of our data that we're storing. And we can actually, so if we need to do an investigation, need to do an audit, we can actually look to see who has access to it, when they've had access to it, what they've done to that file. And that's quite important as well, because that was quite difficult in the past to actually achieve that. But now it's something that you can be doing, and it's quite achievable, and it's in a very simple portal that you can use. And then you can perform investigations from that to see, what's happening with my data. If something has maliciously occurred, you can get back to the source of what's happening.
Yes.
The other thing as well is just looking at, things such as, mentioned earlier that we've got our cloud environment. We might be thinking of Microsoft 365, that's where we're collaborating, but we're using a lot of third-party applications that integrate. Might be a finance app, or it might be something else out there. Using that one identity to then sign into all of those applications, so then we can control access to those third-party clouds. So instead of having local accounts in those, they're all Entra ID. So if someone starts onboards, they can get access, and then it automatically provisions their access to these cloud services. If they change role or leave, we can remove them from those roles, and their access is automatically taken away. And then integrating it with things such as conditional access to say, if you've got to be on a compliant device, it's, you've got to have the right operating system, you've got to be coming in from the right location, and then enforcing MFA. Those are the things that we can do to kind of make sure that people accessing those cloud applications are doing it, with the right identities, coming in from the endpoints that aren't compromised, or they've been prepared the best so that there's a less chance of that occurring.
Yes. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Paul. I think that these are insights were very, very important. So, and today organizations really need to understand that it's imperative that they look into protecting their data and sensitive information. So, especially because they can perform faster with as they look into AI. So, but also in the meanwhile, making sure that they are not compromising their data security. So, thank you again.
No problem.